I think Jack the Ripper would be excellent. It's one of the most famous unsolved cases, has huge search volume, and would fit the true crime category well. It's also a case with lots of documented evidence like Flight 19. Let me create a 10-minute script focusing on the Whitechapel murders, the investigation, and the enduring mystery of who the Ripper was. Video 7. Jack the Ripper, the Whitechapel murders that terrorized London. August 31st, 1888. Whitechapel, London. A woman's body was found in the early morning darkness on Bucks Row. Her throat had been slashed so deeply she was nearly decapitated. But that was just the beginning. In the following weeks, 4 more women would be murdered in the same horrific manner, each killing more savage than the last, each victim found in the dark, narrow streets of London's East End. The killer sent letters to the press, taunting police and promising more murders. He gave himself a name that would echo through history: Jack the Ripper. He was never caught, never identified, and to this day, we still don't know who he was. 5 women brutally murdered, hundreds of suspects investigated, 136 years of speculation. This is the story of history's most infamous serial killer, a case so cold it might never be solved. Welcome to Whitechapel, 1888. Welcome to the Autumn of Terror. To understand the Ripper, you must understand Whitechapel in 1888. The East End of London was one of the most desperate slums in the world. Overcrowded, disease-ridden, a place where the poorest of the poor struggled to survive. Over 900,000 people crammed into just a few square miles. Entire families lived in single rooms. Disease was rampant: cholera, tuberculosis, typhus. The average life expectancy was under 40 years. Crime was everywhere: theft, violence, desperation. For women with no money, no family, and no prospects, there was often only one way to survive: prostitution. It's estimated that 1,200 prostitutes worked the streets of Whitechapel. They'd take clients into dark alleys or abandoned courtyards for a few pennies, just enough to keep them off the streets for one more night. The Metropolitan Police patrolled Whitechapel, but there weren't enough of them. The streets were a maze of narrow passages, dead-end courts, and dark alleys. A killer could strike and disappear into the shadows within seconds. And in the autumn of 1888, that's exactly what happened. 5 murders are definitively attributed to Jack the Ripper, the Canonical 5. Let's honor these women by remembering who they were, not just how they died. Mary Ann Nichols, 43 years old, nicknamed Polly. She'd been married with 5 children, but fell into alcoholism after her husband's infidelity. By 1888, she was homeless, sleeping in workhouses and common lodging houses. On August 31st, she needed 4 pence for a bed. She went out at 2:30 a.m. to earn it. At 3:40 a.m., her body was found on Bucks Row. Throat cut, abdomen slashed. She was the first. September 8th, 1 week later, Annie Chapman, 47 years old, nicknamed Dark Annie, a widow who'd turned to prostitution after her husband's death. She'd been ill with tuberculosis and malnutrition. At 5:30 a.m., her body was discovered in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. The murder was more brutal: throat severed, abdomen opened, internal organs removed with what the medical examiner called anatomical knowledge. The killer was escalating. September 30th, Elizabeth Stride, 44 years old, nicknamed Long Liz, a Swedish immigrant who'd survived poverty, domestic violence, and the sinking of a ship years earlier. At 1 a.m., her body was found in Dutfield's yard. Throat cut deeply, but nothing else. No mutilation. Theory: the killer was interrupted, because within an hour, he struck again. Catherine Edwose, 46 years old, nicknamed Kate. At 1:45 a.m., just 45 minutes after Elizabeth Stride's murder, Kate's body was discovered in Mitre Square. This time, the killer wasn't interrupted. The mutilation was extensive, horrific, organs removed, face disfigured, a kidney taken. The police believed the Ripper had killed twice in one night, the double event. November 9th, Mary Jane Kelly, only 25 years old, the youngest victim, Irish, attractive. She lived in a single room at Miller's Court. Unlike the others, she was killed indoors. When police broke down her door at 10:45 a.m., they found a scene so horrific that even hardened officers vomited. The murder was frenzied, unimaginably brutal. The medical examiner estimated the killer had spent over 2 hours with the body. This was the last of the Canonical Five. After Mary Kelly, the Ripper, or someone using that name, vanished. The investigation was massive. Scotland Yard assigned their best detectives. Inspector Frederick Aberline led the Whitechapel murders inquiry. Hundreds of men were questioned, suspects detained. But Victorian police methods were primitive compared to today's standards. No fingerprinting, no DNA, no security cameras. Even eyewitness testimony was unreliable. Forensics barely existed. The police had clues, but they led nowhere. Witnesses reported seeing women with various men shortly before the murders, but descriptions varied wildly. Some said a man in a top hat, others a foreign sailor, some a doctor's bag, others a leather apron. The East End was full of thousands of men who fit vague descriptions. Then, on September 27th, a letter arrived at the Central News Agency. It was written in red ink and addressed, "Dear Boss." The writer claimed to be the Whitechapel murderer. He promised more killings. He mocked the police, and he signed it, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." It was the first time that name appeared. More letters followed. The most chilling arrived at George Lusk, chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. Inside was half a human kidney, allegedly from Catherine Edwose. The letter, written in barely literate scrawl, read, "From hell. Mr. Lusk, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman. The other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice." Were the letters genuine or hoaxes? Hundreds of letters claiming to be from the Ripper flooded police and newspapers. Most were clearly fake. Journalists, attention seekers, and pranksters. But some investigators believed a few letters were real. The handwriting, the details, the timing. Someone knew things only the killer would know. Over the decades, over 100 people have been named as suspects, some credible, most absurd. Let's examine the most compelling. Montague John Druitt, 31 years old, a barrister and schoolteacher, upper class, educated. He was dismissed from his teaching post in November 1888 for unknown reasons. Weeks later, his body was pulled from the Thames River, suicide by drowning. His death coincided with the end of the Ripper murders. Police notes later revealed Druitt was Melville Magnagen's top suspect. But there's no evidence connecting him to Whitechapel. No motive, no proof, just timing. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jewish immigrant living in Whitechapel. He worked as a barber. In 1891, he was committed to an asylum for insanity, described as violent, hearing voices, and having homicidal tendencies. He matched some witness descriptions. He lived in the area. Police surveillance notes mention him. In 2014, DNA analysis of a shawl supposedly from one crime scene allegedly matched a descendant of Kosminski's sister. But the DNA evidence is disputed. Contamination, chain of custody issues. Many experts reject it entirely. George Chapman, real name Seweryn Klosowski, a Polish immigrant who worked as a barber surgeon in Whitechapel in 1888. He later poisoned 3 of his wives and was hanged in 1903. Inspector Aberline himself believed Chapman was the Ripper, reportedly saying after Chapman's arrest, "You've got Jack the Ripper at last." But most criminologists disagree. Serial killers rarely change their methods so dramatically, from frenzied knife attacks to calculated poisoning. Walter Sickert, a famous British painter who lived near Whitechapel and created disturbing paintings with themes of violence against women. Crime novelist Patricia Cornwell spent millions investigating Sickert, convinced he was the Ripper. She bought his paintings, analyzed his DNA, and wrote books accusing him. But historians and criminologists find no credible evidence. Sickert's art was provocative, but that doesn't make him a murderer. The conspiracy theories get wilder. Some claim Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, was the Ripper, or that royal physician Sir William Gull committed the murders to cover up a royal scandal. These theories have been thoroughly debunked. The prince had solid alibis. The stories were fabricated by hoaxers decades later, but they persist because people love a royal conspiracy. The truth? We don't know. The Ripper could have been anyone: a local butcher with anatomical knowledge, a doctor, a sailor, a tradesman, someone who lived in Whitechapel and blended into the crowd, someone who stopped killing because he died, moved away, or was institutionalized for unrelated reasons. Without modern forensics, without DNA, without security footage, we're left with speculation. 136 years later, Whitechapel still exists. The streets have changed, the slums are gone, but you can still walk Bucks Row, now Durward Street. You can still visit Mitre Square. The locations where 5 women lost their lives are now marked by plaques and tours. In 2018, a memorial was finally erected to honor the 5 canonical victims. For too long, they'd been remembered only as the Ripper's prey, but they were real women, mothers, daughters, survivors of poverty and hardship who deserved better than they got in life and better to be forgotten in death. The case remains officially unsolved. Scotland Yard closed active investigation decades ago, but the files are preserved. New theories emerge constantly. Amateur sleuths analyze every detail. Authors write books naming new suspects, but without a confession, without DNA, without a body to exhume and test, we may never know. Who was Jack the Ripper? Was he a doctor, a butcher, a madman, a local resident, or a visiting foreigner? Did he stop because he died? Was he locked away in an asylum? Or did he simply disappear back into the crowds of Victorian London, taking his secret to the grave? Case number CR002, Jack the Ripper. 5 women murdered. Autumn 1888. Status: unsolved. The greatest criminal mystery in history, and one we may never solve.